You are welcome to yet another episode of HN What's Your Say? The #1 listening show, where we discuss real issues with real people like you. We are still featuring R. Kelly. Real name Robert Sylvester Kelly. Also known as the R&B King. One of the most disturbing and deeply frustrating aspects of the R. Kelly legal matter is the undeniable influence of the Me Too movement in shaping public opinion, and even worse, in swaying the minds of jurors who were supposed to be impartial. Now, let's be clear. The Me Too movement started with noble intentions. It was born out of a real need to give voice to the voiceless, to confront decades of silence and impunity where sexual harassment and abuse were swept under the rug. But somewhere along the way, this movement transformed from a search for justice to a modern-day witch hunt. And unfortunately, R. Kelly became one of its biggest scapegoats. The media frenzy that accompanied his arrest, trial and conviction was not just background noise. It became the soundtrack of the prosecution's strategy. Jurors who were expected to evaluate the facts with clear and rational minds had already been bombarded with headlines, documentaries, hashtags and social media narratives all branding him guilty long before a single piece of evidence was fairly assessed. And instead of the government condemning this obvious prejudice, they encouraged it. Worse still, they weaponized it. Let's take a closer look at how this happened. In January 2019, Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx made a public plea urging any women who had accusations against R. Kelly to come forward.
Back in 2019, I stood in this very room and asked for anyone who was a victim or witness to crimes allegedly perpetrated by Mr. Kelly to come forward.
On the surface, this might seem like a reasonable step. But when you consider the environment in which this call was made at the height of the surviving R. Kelly documentary buzz and amid rising social media outrage, it becomes clear that this wasn't about justice. This was about building a narrative. It was about crowdsourcing accusers and not verifying credible complaints. Fox's actions essentially said, if you've got a story true, embellished, or entirely fictional and you've got a vendetta against R. Kelly, now is your moment. Is this how a civilized justice system should work? Imagine applying this same method to any successful man in the public eye. Athletes, CEOs, artists or even billionaires. The truth is, any high-profile male figure would likely attract a wave of so-called accusers if the media and government opened a window like this. Why? Because naturally, many men, rich or poor, have bitter exes, flings or acquaintances with unresolved emotional baggage. Some of those people didn't take breakups well. Some felt hurt, betrayed or used. And a few unfortunately will take any opportunity to seek revenge, financial gain or their moment in the spotlight at the man's expense. So now ask yourself, if the government provided a stage for these people to air their so-called grievances, wouldn't the result always be the same? That's exactly what happened to R. Kelly. This wasn't about justice. It was about optics. It was about pandering to the loudest voices on social media and positioning prosecutors as champions of the cause regardless of whether the actual evidence held water. And that brings us to the role of the prosecutors themselves. Specifically Angel Crowell and Elizabeth Geddes. Their conduct throughout these trials raises serious concerns. Prosecutors are supposed to represent fairness and justice. They're not supposed to form alliances with the media, exploit cultural movements, or to bend the law to ensure a conviction. But that's exactly what we saw. From selective use of witnesses to deliberate mischaracterization of relationships, the prosecutors were more interested in painting a villain than uncovering the truth. There was an intentional effort to bundle unrelated or exaggerated accusations into RICO charges. A legal strategy typically reserved for organized crime, not for someone accused of morally questionable personal relationships. When the forced labor charge was introduced, even appellate judges had to pause for a bit and ask questions. One judge bluntly asked the prosecution, "Where is the labor?" That question alone should tell you everything. It was a charge so far-fetched that even legal professionals couldn't trace its foundation. Yet it remained part of the government's arsenal because it sounded dramatic. It added gravity. It actually made R. Kelly look like a monster in the eyes of the public and the jury, even if it was legally nonsensical. What we witnessed in R. Kelly's trial was not the pursuit of justice, but the performance of prosecution. It was showmanship disguised as law. And when the media, the Me Too movement and politically motivated prosecutors combine forces, justice becomes a casualty. Now let's talk more about how the media circus affected this entire process. We saw a documentary released at a time when legal matters were still pending. Surviving R. Kelly aired not as a documentary but as a public execution. It wasn't a balanced account. It didn't verify facts. And it didn't include counter-narratives. Instead, it gave a platform to people with histories of lying, inconsistencies, and even those with financial motives. And that documentary didn't stay in the entertainment world. It bled directly into the courtroom. Prosecutors leaned on the documentary's emotional impact. Jurors were selected from a pool of citizens who had watched the film. The presumption of innocence, supposedly the foundation of American justice, was effectively dead before the trial even started. Kim Foxx's public appeal also echoed what we've seen in many emotionally charged, high-profile cases. Guilty until proven innocent has replaced due process. That's not just wrong. That's dangerous. In fact, we must ask ourselves, if a man is hated enough, if the media paints him evil enough, do we allow prosecutors to bend the law to lock him away? Do we allow our justice system to be guided by tweets, Facebook posts, and talk show outrage? Because if that's where we're headed, then no one is safe. You might not like R. Kelly. You might not agree with his lifestyle. You might find some of his choices morally questionable. But that's not the same as guilt for breaking laws. That's not the same as organized crime. That's not the same as forced labor or sex trafficking. Those are very specific crimes. And if the prosecution cannot prove those charges beyond a reasonable doubt without relying on public outrage or emotional blackmail, then a conviction becomes not just unfair but unconstitutional. Let's also remember this: during the height of this hysteria, it became politically fashionable to go after R. Kelly. There was political capital to be gained. Prosecutors, activists, and public figures all had something to win by being on the supposed right side of the Me Too movement. But the right side of politics is not always the right side of the law. And in this case, truth was trampled. The role of the judiciary is to rise above public pressure. The role of prosecutors is to follow the facts, not the headlines. And the role of the American justice system is to uphold fairness for all, even when the accused is unpopular. But what we saw in R. Kelly's case was the exact opposite. Kim Foxx, Angel Krull, Elizabeth Geddes, they did not just make errors in judgment. They actively participated in a campaign that encouraged bias-fueled emotional reactions and ultimately tainted the integrity of both trials. And they did so while the government turned a blind eye, or worse still, silently cheered them on. It's not just a betrayal of one man. It's a betrayal of the very principles America claims to uphold. Every citizen, celebrity or not, deserves a fair trial. Not trial by media. Not trial by movement, but trial by law. And when you look at R. Kelly's case through that lens, what you see is not a victory for the said victims but a failure of justice. To those who continue to dig beneath the surface, those who refuse to accept the mainstream narrative without question, and those who demand that the law remain sacred even in the face of controversy, this message is for you. Stay informed and critical. Because when emotion replaces evidence and movements replace due process, anyone can become the next target. That is all we had for you today on HN What's Your Say. To keep updated whenever we post a new video, subscribe to this channel now. Also remember to hit the bell icon and enable notifications. And feel free to share your opinions with us in the comment section below, and let us know if you would like us to publish your views in our next release. We value all our subscribers' opinions.